Hi, everyone. Welcome. Come on into our Zoom room. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining in from. We're so happy to have you here. Come on in. We're going to allow for a few moments to let all of your colleagues across the country join in. In the meantime, we want to hear from you. If you want to say hello to us in the chat, say hello. Do a shout out to your organization. Remember in the chat to send it to all panelists and attendees so we can all see it. But yes, introduce yourself in the chat, please. We'd love to hear from you. Good afternoon, Susanna. It's nice to have you here. You see Samantha from Austin Community College. Hey. Perfect. So just give us a couple of moments. We're going to give it another minute or two to let more attendees join in live today, and then we'll get started. But yes, in the meantime, we want to hear from you. Send a chat to all panelists and attendees and say, hey, introduce yourself. And we see that there are from a lot of diverse workplaces here today. This is so great. We have, of course, Austin and UT Austin represented here with our backyard for Lexi and I, but we also see folks joining in from Santa Clara, from St. Mary's, that's in San Antonio, from Manhattan Community College, so Rutgers and New Jersey. It's so great to have so many of you here today. Give it maybe another couple of seconds and then we'll get started. UNT in Fort Worth, welcome. St. Cloud State University in Minnesota, it's so nice to have you here. And our colleagues from Virginia. Great, it's so nice to have so many of you here. Okay, perfect, so it's 12:01. We have a good live audience here today. Are my co-presenters ready to go? Get a thumbs up, ready to go. All right, okay, perfect. We'll start it off then. So hello and welcome everyone. My name is Sana Megani. I'm the co-creator and moderator for the webinar series, It's Okay to Not Be Okay. This webinar series is made possible by Trellis Company and Trellis Foundation. Trellis Company is a 501c3 with nearly 40 years of history in working to promote access and success in higher education. The Community Investment Division where I work provides services to students, institutions, and policymakers. The Trellis Foundation focuses on improving attainment for low to moderate income students as they pursue post-secondary credentials and degrees in the state of Texas. Thank you to the foundation team and everyone behind the scenes who made today's webinar and this entire series possible. This series is an extension of the self-care and wellness workshop Lexi and I organized back in July. I can't believe it's been so long, but we know that as professionals of color supporting students in higher education, we're aware of not only the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on our communities, but also the physical, emotional, and mental toll it takes to live, work, survive, and thrive through both the COVID and racial pandemics in a really highly charged election year. Yet we're still showing up to serve our communities, our students, and our colleagues. And through all of this, we may be facing job insecurity, risk of eviction, fear of losing our homes and loved ones, and fires and hurricanes, all while experiencing racial trauma. And today we're going to dive deeper into how racism and white supremacy culture appears in our workplaces and how allies can move beyond lip service and book clubs into real actionable allyship. I should say this is part 3 of our webinar series. So if you missed the other 2 parts, I'll drop a link in the chat in just a second so you can catch up and you can listen to the recordings, download the slide decks. This webinar is also being recorded. You'll have access to the recording and the slide deck as soon as it's available on our website. And also, as a reminder, if you have to head out early, please remember to complete our survey. It's going to be available to you as soon as you exit the Zoom room. It'll pop up. And if you have questions, use the Q&A feature to send those to us throughout. We'll answer some during and then some after the session. So with that, I want to introduce our guest speakers. I'm really excited today. First, to welcome back my friend, sister, and co-creator, Lexi. Lexi is a licensed professional counselor and currently specializes in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, grief and loss, young adults, and trauma. So many of you have seen Lexi with me over the last couple of webinars. I'm really excited to have her back. But I'm also just as excited to welcome our new guest speaker, Trey Johnson. Trey is a freelance writer on race and culture and a longtime career educator. He started his professional education as a high school English teacher, and his roles have included administrative positions in schools. He was the executive director for Teach for America, Greater Philadelphia, senior manager of the District Advisory Board and Strategic Partnerships in Camden City School District. He's a freelance career writer as a cultural critic and essayist, and has had appearances on CNN Tonight with Don Lemon, CBS This Morning, PBS NewsHour, and NPR Morning Edition. His writing has appeared in Rolling Stone, Vanity Fair, New York Times, Vox, San Francisco Chronicle, The Washington Post, and several other outlets. His article in The Washington Post titled, "When Black People Are in Pain, White People Just Join Book Clubs," is the inspiration for today's webinar. So we'll start today, as we always do, with a meditation. Lexi will lead us through some slides, and then we'll transition to our talk with Trey on allyship. So with that, I'll hand it over to our guest speakers to say hello and get us started.
Hello, all. It's nice to see some of you back. I'm just getting the slides set up. So you all should be really excited to be here today because I'm really excited. And Trey, man, he's going to be doing a lot of the heavy lifting today. So Son and I have been really excited, actually, to also learn from him today. So we are so excited to have him here. Trey, you want to say anything before I get the slides up?
Probably would be, wouldn't it? Hi, everyone. I'll be doing a lot of talking later on, so I was just saving some airspace, but I'm super excited to talk with you all, and you should feel free to chat in any type of thoughts, questions, what have you, as we're all going through this talk together. But we'll have time to answer any kind of questions you have on the back end, too. Thanks.
Okay, y'all, let's get started. One of the reasons you're here today, we know everybody loves slides, so we got slides for you, don't worry. But if you can, and if you feel comfortable, I'm going to turn my video off like normal. So Trey, you're welcome to turn your video off too. We're just going to do a quick meditation to help remind y'all why you're here. Take a few deep breaths, because some of these topics, they're not comfortable, and they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to cause some amount of discomfort. So just take a deep breath. Start by taking a few deep breaths and find a comfortable position with both feet on the floor. And I want you to breathe in through your nose for 4 and out through your mouth for 8, if you can. Do what's comfortable. And for a moment, can you imagine that your feet are growing roots? And can you let those roots go as far down into Mother Earth as you want them to go? I want you to inhale strength and solidity and exhale uncertainty, if you're comfortable. Breathe. Just notice your body responding to your need for presence here today. Imagine your face tilting ever so slightly to receive the warmth of the sun as you begin to grow and flower. Breathe in and out. Imagine your roots taking up as much space as they need. Your body's bursting with color and peace. With each breath, your roots grow outward and upward, reminding you that you are strong, you are worthy, and you are well. May you be filled with divine energy. May we be well and together for this hour. When you're ready, open your eyes, come back, join us again. Stretch, whatever you need to do. So I wanted to start today's webinar with another quote, and I think this is a great quote as we roll into allyship and talking about intention. And I know, I'm sure Trey will talk about intention, but good intention is a hall pass through history, a sleeping pill that ensures the dream. So if you've read Ta-Nehisi Coates' I don't think I added it to the resources between the world and me. I will add that later, or I'll send it to y'all later. But we can all get through with good intention, but it's really about the actions that we're going to take. The intention, it doesn't help people of color, especially right now. I think we're seeing that right now. So just something to think about, keep in the back of your head. So culturally taxed and depleted, what does that mean? So we're here today to talk about microaggressions. And if you haven't been able to tell, like I wore this shirt for y'all today. So if you're familiar with some of the debates we've been experiencing in this political arena, that too, as we know, can be considered a microaggression. How many times have, especially women of color, been interrupted and not been allowed to finish a thought or just offer their opinion, their assertive opinion, just often taken as an attack. So here's just the definition. Again, providing you with slides. They are informational. What I want you to do is take them and digest and take this information as you listen to our conversation today. They're everyday slights, put downs, invalidations, and insults, and they're meant to be directed towards socially devalued groups. Again, that well-intentioned, that's why I included that quote. They're by well-intentioned people, but they don't understand how harmful what they're saying actually is. And so microaggressions can be broken down into 3 different types of microaggressions. And so one is a microassault. You can read the definition there. It's very blatant. It is a directed attack. It's meant to convey discriminatory sentiment or a biased sentiment. A micro insult, so unintentional behaviors or a verbal comment that might convey some amount of insensitivity and meant to demean sexual orientation, racial heritage, gender identity, religion. So we're not just talking about race here as well. And micro invalidation, so unintentional verbal comments, behaviors that are meant to exclude or dismiss psychological thoughts. So here are some examples. We want to talk about examples now. So micro assault, if you've experienced, it's just the blatant overt discrimination. If you've ever been called the N-word, that is a micro assault, which can also be considered a macroaggression as well, because it's blatant and it's intended to harm. Any type of sexual harassment, overt intent to harm. Even comments such as calling a woman a bitch. So we call assertive women that all the time, and all they're trying to do is be assertive in the workplace, but it's taken as being aggressive. And so there's no way that she can advocate for herself because she's seen as angry and aggressive. A micro insult. So that could be rushing to help a disabled person who's, let's say, trying to get on the bus. You don't know that they need help, but you're making an assumption that because you see them, let's say, on crutches or on a wheelchair, or that they need your help. A micro insult. I have friends who are also Black physicians. They're in a room with their coat on. It has their name. It says MD, and someone looks at them and asks them to grab the mop and clean up the floor. That is a micro insult. I've been told myself, oh, you're so articulate. As opposed to what? Compared to what? Why am I articulate? What does that mean? So that's assuming that Black people are not supposed to be articulate or be able to speak. So that is a micro insult. There's also something, there's a video that I'll encourage y'all to look up. I think it's called, But Where Are You Really From? That is a micro insult. And it's a woman who's running and someone stops. He's like, but where are you from? And she's like San Diego, down the block. And she's an Asian woman. He's like, no, but really, where are you from? And it ends up being kind of comedic, but I definitely should watch it if you haven't been able to see it. It's a micro insult. Micro invalidation. How many times, especially in the last few months, I don't see color. Or there's only one race. It's the human race. That is a micro invalidation because you do see color. We all see color. Some people are colorblind, who are literally colorblind, but that's different, right? Like we don't expect you to see the spectrum of color. But when you see me as a Black woman. I'd like you to acknowledge that and try and understand what my experience has been as a Black woman. Or even dismissing sexual orientation as a phase. We've seen that happen all the time. I see that in my therapy room where other counselors even, or other advisors, family members have dismissed their sexual orientation as, oh, you're going to grow out of it. It's fine. You'll be fine. And it's not a phase. Mental health now. So, right, we could talk about microaggressions. I'm sure we could have a whole webinar on microaggressions, but you have all the information. We'll give you all the resources you need. But how does all of that impact your mental health now? So if you could imagine on a daily basis being told you're so articulate, or the overt types of discrimination, hearing somebody laugh or tell a joke about the N-word, that includes the N-word, but they actually say it, not realizing or caring that you're around, being told, well, I can't be racist because I have Black friends. We've also heard that, and usually it's like one or two, and they take that as the entire perspective of the entire Black experience or the experience of someone of color. And so how does that impact your mental health? This might just be kind of skimming the surface. I wanted to give you some, but have you been in chronic pain and it's unexplainable? You've gone to the doctor and you can't figure out why you're constantly in pain. That could just be discrimination. That could be exhaustion. So fatigue, if you're constantly fatigued and you don't know why, you try to show up for work and you show up for other people, but you can't figure out why you're so fatigued. It could just be over and over the cumulative effects of feeling discriminated against, not feeling welcome, not feeling like there's ever going to be true change. Low self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, of course. If you're constantly being told things, or you're hearing things around you, if you're being insulted, if everything's just a phase, you're going to think that you have less value. And we'll get to that in a second. Depression and anxiety, for sure, that will show up. That's how microaggressions can impact how you're walking through the world, how you're existing in the world, but also PTSD. There's the cumulative effect of everything you have experienced. You may notice more hypervigilance. Let's say how many times you've been pulled over by the police and you're scared over and over and over again, or you're questioned over and over again. And so every time you see someone in a uniform, you tense up, you start sweating, it feels like panic and you don't know why. Those could be the markers of PTSD, and we should not dismiss that as just something you're supposed to be okay with. Questions of worth and value. Did I waste my time on this career? I'm imagining all of you in your offices right now. Should I have picked something different where I'm not constantly around these well-meaning white people? I'm exhausted. What should I do? Have I reached the end of my growth, right? That glass ceiling that's there. Is that it? Which can also lead to powerlessness. Nothing you do or nothing that you can say will change the system right now. And so you might just be tired. What can I do? Is it just me? Does anybody else see this? Is anybody else wanting to fight for this? Health issues, again, just the whole spectrum of health issues that can go with chronic pain. We've talked a little bit too about how your mental health can impact physical health, and that's been in the other couple webinars we've already done. So I implore you to look back at those. And if you have questions, just let me know. Feelings of inferiority, so less than, you've been made to feel like you're less than. And one thing we tend to skim over is death. The effects of stress, you may have heard the term weathering before as well. People of color can only scream so loud into the void without being heard and survive and thrive. We'll talk about that. We would love to thrive in this world. I know you would love to thrive in your workplace, but there's only so much you can take. And then if you add in health issues that could be impacting how you're just approaching each day, what happens when you can't even just get to that place of survival? And it could mean death. When I look at things like Black maternal mortality rate, for instance, that's a great example. That rate is higher than other races. It's about 4 to 5 times as high. And why? It is due to microaggressions. And those are some of the mamas that I work with where they've been discriminated against just because of the color of their skin. So that could mean death. It could mean the death of their baby. It could mean the death of any person of color who is constantly being discriminated against and not feeling like they're being heard or valued. So how does this all show up in the workplace, right? Now that you're dealing with the microaggressions, what else are you dealing with? White supremacy culture. It is everywhere. It is everywhere. And to be fair, we all subscribe to it. That's the only way we know how to live, is through this lens of white supremacy culture. So it is up to, we need white people to help dismantle this. But we're all subscribing to it because this is all we know. Something like dress code. It's appropriate to wear a suit and tie. Who decided it was appropriate to wear a suit and tie to work? Or we have heard about things with Black hair or Black grooming practices where you can't wear locks into work, or that is deemed unprofessional. It's also very classist and sexist dress code, so something to consider. And I highly recommend everyone. I included the resource at the bottom. It's a great kind of pamphlet that outlines all of these different points and more about how white supremacy culture shows up in the workplace. So highly recommend it. Perfectionism. It points out how somebody's work is inadequate and you're not really able to appreciate what's actually going well. So that shows up. Worship of the written word. If it's not in a memo, then it doesn't exist and it's not correct. So it devalues how we tend to share information with each other because it's not always in a written memo. We know in different cultures, we pass along information in different ways, and that's not valued in the workplace. Defensiveness. This is one that we see show up all the time. So it's important I read this note to you. The structure is set up to spend energy trying to prevent abuse and protect power as it exists, rather than clarify who has power and how they are expected to use it. We have to hold people accountable, and we don't. People tend to draw the wall up. It feels like an attack when you're saying, I would like to clarify how you are holding this power and exerting it, but instead it feels like an attack on their character. Only one right way, claiming a right to comfort. Tokenism. Are you the only person in your office who's a person of color? It's like recruiting people of color to DEI positions, but you don't give them any power. So is it just for show? So that doesn't help. Nothing's going to move forward. Individualism. You are responsible for solving your own problem. We will not come together as a collective to help solve this one problem. And fear of open conflict. You raise a concern, causes someone discomfort, and then it shuts it down. That's it. Like there's no more discussion on it. Again, highly recommend the article and that link. Let's talk about how this all shows up now. You're tired, you're exhausted, you're still showing up to work or barely showing up to work, and you still see Black death in the news. I would argue to say we're still in an election season, and we're all grieving. We're tired. We're just tired. And it's just a constant cycle of sadness. These are the 5 stages of grief. They are not linear in any way, shape, or form. But this is how we tend to encapsulate what the grief experience can be like. Denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. I don't want to spend a lot of time on those. They're pretty self-explanatory. Again, they're not linear. What I have read, though, that I would like to point out, and I have included the reference and I included the article, something that's coming up is understanding the 5 stages of Black grief. And I do think this applies for other people of color, other groups where we don't have the privilege of going through some of those other stages of grief when we're constantly experiencing death. It's all around us and we are powerless to stop it. Despair. So a person of color is always living their lives experiencing loss. That's where they are. It's marked by hopelessness and helplessness. Self-blame. I could have protected my loved one from death and I didn't. So that's what should I have done differently? And it's guilt, right? There's guilt in that, but it's really up to the system to change. It wasn't you. Move to action. The time to grieve and process loss is usually not afforded. You have to move into planning if it's planning a funeral, but then there's another death that you see in the news or it's your family member. We're hearing about more COVID deaths as well. You're trying to navigate through life and it's hard. Endurance. It seems like things are returning to normal, but they're not. Your mourning is going to intensify, but people think that you're doing okay because you're back to work. Everything's fine, but it's not fine. and survival. So you're trying to survive in a system that's already stacked against you. So this is where you're in survival mode. All of those other things we've talked about in previous webinars about being in survival mode, you've gone through these stages to end up in survival. And that's where you are. Even in the workplace, you're showing up just in survival mode. So what do you do with all this grief? What do you do with all these microaggressions? What do you do with your other colleagues who are not showing up and not asking you how you're doing when you don't feel valued, when you don't feel heard on a day-to-day basis, on an hour-to-hour basis? So when we were planning this webinar, Trey and I were talking, and I asked him about his experience and kind of how he came to write the article around white people joining book clubs. And he shared with me, and he said it was okay to share, too, that he was feeling tapped out in the summer. I mean, we all were. I think a lot of us just kind of checked out. And the thing that I realized, too, about what he was sharing about how he was tapped out and seeing family members who didn't have access to services and just kind of feeling helpless, what he did was tap into the best parts of himself by writing. He's got some great writing. If y'all haven't read it, please do. And so we all will grapple with the existential givens of life, like death, isolation, meaninglessness, and freedom. But as people of color, like, we're always living and trying to figure out death. Like, we're always grappling with that, not just as a concept, but a constant reality. So by writing this article, he's trying to give us information. He's trying to help y'all move beyond this book club. What can you do? And we are so happy to have him here today to talk a little bit more about what allyship could look like. Welcome.
Trey, before you start, I just want to acknowledge and validate all the comments that came in to the panelists and to the broader audience on our colleagues who have experienced microaggressions in the workplace. And I just want to say that I see you all and I hear you, and I feel that pain because I have been in those places where I have experienced many of these micro assaults and aggressions. There's one comment particularly about how a supervisor told colleagues that I don't see your color, I don't see this. And if and when you're ready, Trey will share some tactics on how you can move your organization past this color blindness and how you can, if you feel that you're in a place you can do that, where you can participate in those conversations. But before I wanted to move on, I just wanted to say that I acknowledged these comments and I felt them, and I hear you all, and thank you so much for sharing those. But Trey, it's all you.
Thanks, y'all. And before I go into this, I think acknowledgements is being a key word here. I just want to acknowledge Sana and Lexi, particularly as two women of color who are doing additional labor while doing a lot of things that are going through, that everyone's experiencing during the pandemic. It is both a gift and an unfortunate cycle that when life goes to shit and the society goes to the rails, that oftentimes Black women and women of color are kind of the ones picking up the work and helping us to move forward. So thank you all for creating this space for everyone who's been joining so far. And certainly thank you for extending time for me to join you all too. And I'll try to go through as thorough as possible about what I think about how I've been grappling with a lot of these things, but also I want to make sure that we reserve some time for you all to have some questions. So Lexi talked a little bit already about what kind of was the origin source around me writing this particular essay. But I'm going to add just a little bit more color and context onto it, and also just kind of walk you through what the conversations I've been a part of have been leading up to today's discussion. So a lot of people, when the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery things, all those travesties came down, it felt like it was wave after wave crashing upon me, around people in my community. And there was one particular day I was just on social media, I was on Facebook, and I was scrolling through, and I just saw something that just kind of set me off, which was, when you look at things like Facebook, you see just how conversations are compartmentalized around identity and comforts and such. And I kept seeing this thing where my Black friends in particular were leaning in and emotionally invested in what was going on as people were taken to the streets and people were in so much pain and turmoil over what was happening. And then, and as I was scrolling through too, I was seeing not just some of my white friends like being a little more aloof, but in particular, what set me off was one cluster of white friends that I have that I've known for umpteen years. I saw like a little notification bar that they were starting an anti-racist book club. It's like, come on, y'all. Like, y'all have been in this city for dozens of years. I'm in Philadelphia. You've been doing this work from an urban ed perspective for a while. It just felt like a tone-deaf way to engage with what was going on. And as a matter of fact, it felt like a lack of engagement with what was going on. So I've been writing for the last couple of years in general, but I was like, I feel like I should just see if I can write about this somehow. And so I have a relationship with Washington Post, and I pitched it to an editor, and I said, like, look, I think I want to try to talk about like what I'm seeing happen here. Like we have these kind of like parallel cycles that folks are experiencing, and none of them are quite meaningfully overlapping. And more importantly to me, things aren't getting disrupted well enough. And I want to talk about establishing like a new baseline around how we're reacting to and engaging with these moments when they happen to us. And so we put this essay together. I had great help kind of like getting it across to the finish line, and then we send it out to the world. And, you know, it's elicited a huge response from people. And I think some of what I feel like is responsible to do is kind of underscore a couple things around this. One is that I'm glad it's provoked the conversation that it's had, but, you know, beyond the book club as a slide and as a title is very important to hone in on, because I keep reinforcing to people, if you actually deeply read and sit with the content of the essay or article, the book club line is like a blip in the wider scheme of what I'm talking about here. It's the book club and it's the sign making, it's the chalk on the sidewalks, it's the pictures with the kids. It's all those things that I was saying that I've been like kind of like the low hanging fruit engagement for non-Black, largely white audiences. When things go awry racially, those are the kind of like activities or actions that people take that don't feel quite intimate or deep enough to just really feel closer to what is going on, and to also just fundamentally move to a place of discomfort of figuring out what needs to be different. And so that's a lot of what this is about. Like, you know, I've had a lot of people, I've done probably since June, I probably have done a dozen or so talks around this. And the thing that constantly comes up is like, well, book clubs are okay, right? And I'm like, yes, book clubs are absolutely fine, but this is not, the point was not to disparage anyone who chooses to read. It's to get people to pause and reflect. One, is this the first thing that you really need to do? And two, are you seeing this as the most complete activity that you can do that is going to rectify racial injustice? And the likelihood is that to the latter, no. And the bigger thing that I've been trying to get people to think about is some of what we'll talk a little bit more about is not just the notion of allyship, because at the core of this, what we're all asking for, particularly for those of us who don't share, who are outside of the identity of the groups or communities that are most impacted by injustice, I think what we're in particular asking for is like, come a little closer to the fight. But also, I think what we're asking for people to do here too is to establish a new type of baseline that is not just about these things, but also about auditing the background and life and experiences that you have that could be a starting point for change about what could be different about society around us. And so for me, it's about like the sustainability fight. When we talk about allyship, when we talk about reparations, when we talk about restorative justice, it is about like not what you're doing Monday, but what you are doing December 2020, May 2021, so on and so forth. So for me, it's really about like making sure that we break apart the idea that like these small acts and sacrifice, not even really sacrifices if you ask me, but these small acts and show of solidarity actually are really insufficient. Like we are talking about situations and circumstances and policies who at their zenith really do result in the death of entire members of communities that that I certainly feel like I'm a part of. And so I want to the point of discomfort, get people to think about that is not good enough what you're doing right now. And so we need to talk about what you need to be doing first from a different perspective, but also I want you to be thinking about what is going to be the ongoing work and commitment you're going to make to change. So because of this, I thought it was helpful to kind of talk through a little bit about what these terms, you likely hear terms like allyship, solidarity, co-conspirators, all those. I thought it was helpful to at least give you, and I want to caveat that this is my working definition of how I use these terms. You are likely going to come across in readings on the internet and other talks that people will have different articulations. I would argue even better, finer tuned articulations than what I am offering. But this is my back of the napkin one that I often use for people. And so when we talk about allyship and looking at what defines an ally, I consistently go to these three type of working definitions around it. So it's someone belonging to a dominant group who actively disrupts oppressive systems and situations when they're witness to ones that disparage marginalized groups. It is also consistent, sustainable, reliable actions centered on the group or groups they seek to be in partnership with to advance their social justice. And then lastly, and I think this one is almost like if you were going to start at the bottom and go back up, I think this might be one of the key ones that I ask people to think about first, but a learner. So someone who constantly self-evaluates, engages with the perspective of those they seek allyship or accountability. And so I think this is also some of my point about what happens about when we seek any type of dominant group who seeks to be in allyship, in proximity, in solidarity with an oppressed or group that is experiencing injustice. I think one of the things that you should be thinking about doing first is actually considering the perspective and activating the empathy of what it would mean to be a person, a part of that community, and what would justice maybe need to look like for you. I think oftentimes we're thinking about what the action should look like in a way that reinforces not justice or disrupting patterns, but actually what reinforces proof that we are a good person. And that is some of the things I say in talks and keynotes too, when I'm talking about it along the lines of race, that white people, when we're talking about situations that disproportionately impact or harm Black lives, white people and non-Black people often drift towards actions and performances that really are about, when you drill down, are trying to reinforce the idea that they are good and they are innocent amongst all the muck that is happening. And so I would get people to try to walk away first from, this is not about you. This is about something, first of all, it's about my community, and this is about something much bigger than all of us together. This is about how we are trying to disrupt the fake innocence that this country feels like that they have an entitlement to hold on to in general. And so I ask people to think about what would justice look like for you, not what action feels good for you to show to others that you are a good person. And those are totally different orientations to take. I also think too, that when we talk about allyship, that it's important to think about, and this doesn't quite surface itself in these kind of working definition points that I put out, but I think in particular, this is also about what type of sacrifices you are willing to make. We don't get forward, we don't move forward, we don't repair situations without giving up some aspect of power, which often means comfort or discomfort for us. It also means too that it will require us to be at times sidelined and silenced when we are part of the majority who has an opportunity to ride the waves of passivity. But it also means too that I think it means what are the ways that we are actively pulling other people into positions of power, equal access, equal opportunity, when we know they are historically locked out of those things. And so I think that's the other thing that I get people to try to think about too, is that, when we talk about allyship, it is not just about being a listener. It is not just about saying things in meetings or speaking up in moments. It is also about how do we reset a more humane baseline inside of our society. And that means, what I've often said to people is that means that you have an opportunity to address that even inside of the confines of your personal and or professional life. We'll talk about the professional workplace in a second, but first, I wanted to talk a little bit about what that can look like in your personal space. So I think there's a couple of things that can often happen. One, you can look at like, what are your school and housing choices that people are making inside of their personal lives? People can also be looking at what is going on inside of your social networks. Like when you have an opportunity to clue people into some unique access to resources, to jobs, to housing, to what all the things that we kind of like cultivate together or curate as being some of the capital that we have that make it comfortable to live in life. When you have a network that you're sharing those resources and information with, what does that network look like? So I think there's an opportunity to think about like auditing what your existing social group looks like. I think it's also about like service in society and community. There are replete throughout all of our communities. There are groups, there are libraries, there are boards, there are organizations that are working with and supporting communities that are pushed to the margins of access, whether that is political access, social access, fiscal access, educational access. There are ways for you to like lean into those situations and provide some money, some time, skills, what have you. But again, I think it is often about looking at like auditing the background of your own life. And what I also say too, particularly from a Black perspective, is that there is the high likelihood that every one of us has done some type of harm to a Black person over the course of our life. And one of the most uncomfortable things to do is probably start from that place of discomfort of seeking to redress the harm that you've enacted upon someone Black in your life, either along the lines of social, professional, spiritual, fiscal, or whatever harm. And so I think there's some of that too. There's an opportunity to kind of close some of the wounds that we all are walking around with. I know there are certainly people who have done wrong by me, and some of those people actually have taken the time, particularly during this year, to reach out to me and re-engage around those things. And when I have chosen to feel like it is right, I have said yes. And when I have not wanted to do so, I've said no. And so that's something you should be prepared for as well as an ally. But what does this also look like in the workplace? It's something inside of my work here at Catalyst Ed. At Catalyst Ed, just as a quick explainer about who we are, Catalyst Ed is a small education nonprofit. We're actually based in New Orleans, but we have a remote staff around the country. And what we do is we connect organizations who come to us who need expertise to add additional capacity to projects, initiatives, what have you, inside of their organizations. Based on that model, what I do is I actually oversee diversity consultant network. So we have a network hub of about 150 individuals and teams and organizations located throughout the country who are ready to be activated to lend capacity to organizations and senior leaders who come to us around DEI work or journeys that they're trying to do, either as an individual leader or as a leader who is leading an organization-wide effort. So a lot of these conversations, as you can imagine, bump up against the notion of allyship. And there are people at every level of an organization that come and engage with us on these types of issues. So when I look at like both the conversations I have with organizations and staff members, then also mining from my own personal background as a professional who's sat through a number of different seats in a lot of different contexts, I think these are the things that I tend to identify as what allyship in the workplace can look like. So there are making sure that contributions and point of views are known and attributed in meetings, work products, et cetera, when they have been things that have been created by marginalized identities or folks of color inside the workplace. It also means advocating and amplifying the voices of groups not represented in decision-making or discussions, what have you. So I think a lot of us can identify a lot of workplace situations where we're in a room discussing groups that are not present, and everyone feels like they can make decisions or determinations around what those groups need want, believe, or value without ever being curious enough to inhabit the perspective or bring in the perspective of those groups. I think allyship in a workplace can mean someone being top of mind to consciously pipe in the perspective of people and the voices of people who are not present in those situations. The last two things, addressing policies, compensation practices, and hierarchical structures that diminish the rights and mobility of others. And then interrupting social or professional behavior that renders the voices, presence, and contributions of others invisible or less valuable. So there's lots of things like there are, and the way I kind of frame a lot of this is that you want to think about replete in the workplace, there is harm that is enacted upon people virtually every day. And what you want to be discerning about is where are the opportunities that those things are happening around very like hard skill-ish conversations and practices, and where are those things happening around the minutia of day-to-day social engagement and unspoken and spoken behavior inside of the workplace too. There is so many different ways that these things rear their heads inside of a given professional environment. And what I want people to do is become more and more aware of the ways to just not just identify, but in the act of identification, disrupt those things as they make themselves apparent. Let's see if you want to go to the next slide. So when people come to us often, one of the things that we talk about is what do resources actually look like if you're an ally or if you are a person of color who, particularly during the turmoil of this year, you're trying to figure out like, so what do I do? Like, how do I actually move my organization forward? We are showing our behinds in all kinds of ways that make it clear that we are not as fully invested in this work as we could be. And so I think there are a couple of things that we typically tend to see. The headline around all this is that at the end of the day, the most important thing that I have come to understand, both by practice and by my day-to-day job, is that, you want to bring in an expert to do this. You want to bring in an outside party for two reasons. One, folks of color should not be put in the vulnerable position of leading restorative justice work inside of the workplace. We know that opens them up for a lot of attacks and a lot of opportunities to be scapegoated. And that is fundamentally not fair. And as I just saw someone chat in, and I'm assuming it's maybe connected to what I was just saying, but like it also drains. It is an additional labor to marginalized folks to have to not only experience the day-to-day work, but then to be asked to turn into the proselytizer about like how we are all going to get to a new shore together. That is an unfair position to put people in. The other thing too is that I often think about it this way too, is that like when you are sick, and I've borrowed this from a DEI practitioner that I know, when you are a patient that is sick, you don't go to the doctor and both give the diagnosis and then also seek to do the surgery on yourself. And this is very much the same thing. You might be well aware of the things that are not feeling good or going well inside of your particular work culture and place, but it means that you're likely not possessive collectively of the type of skills or expertise or cultural competency to bring your organization fully around to a different place. You might be able to bring people along a certain type of way or to a certain degree, but I think the responsible thing is to recognize that there is going to be a threshold that you're going to hit that is going to require different resources and different expertise than what you all collectively possess together. And so there's a couple of things that I think we see a lot of organizations seek to do. And this list that you see in front of you is not exhaustive. And I would say it is not a situation of like one or the other. I have often seen organizations cycle through some, a few, or all of these things at some point over the entire course of their journey. So there runs a gamut of facilitation. There are assessment tools. So like you want to, sometimes people will say like, well, I know my staff. Everyone actually feels pretty fine here. Color is not an issue. Racial conversation is not an issue. An assessment tool is an opportunity for people to objectively look at data and to anonymously engage with questions and conversations around what the work climate is actually like. So it spits back out to everyone who's engaged with it. What is the actual picture about how people feel? A very popular thing that I know tends to happen are forming the formation of committees, groups, and councils, what I would generally say is that those are great and helpful as a great starting point, but they tend to fall to the wayside, one, because of sustainability, two, because they are not empowered to do anything meaningful or effective to create change inside an organization. And then three, because they're not also often coupled with these additional resources that we have listed here. And then the last couple of things you see are like having restorative healing practices and conversations. Again, best handled by someone who can come in from the outside and manage all that. And then two, affinity spaces. We know that there is an importance for folks who have like-minded identity and cultural backgrounds to have reserved, safe spaces for them to unpack and reflect with one another what they're experiencing and observing every day. And then I think the last thing is, like, again, starting from the bottom and going up top, is being in a position to actually advocate for these resources. And I think whether you are one of the marginalized folks on staff and or whether you are an ally, it is about finding each other to collectively go to leadership and say, we are recognizing what is going on with us, and we want to bring in any number of these types of resources to help us address these things and take some of the weight off of us collectively and not knowing what to do. Let's put some trust in the hands of someone who has done this 20 times over to know what to do next. The last thing I'll just quickly share, and I think it's the last perhaps slide that I have that's related to my talk before I turned over to questions, is that, again, I'm a writer, so like I am not at all averse to people reading things or engaging with text. And I put out a list on that last slide of around a couple of texts that I think have been fundamental for me in understanding and grappling with a lot of things in society. And again, not an exhaustive list, but like if I were to do some quick recommendations, those are some of the things that I would offer. So I will stop there in case there are any questions or dialogue in general that people want to engage in with the time we have left.
Great. Thanks so much, Trey. Really appreciate that. Lexi, if you want to just go quickly to the slide about our upcoming webinar before we close out here and start the discussion. So part 4 of our webinar series will be in December. It's about community meditation and trauma-conscious yoga. So we're going to talk about intergenerational trauma and not just surviving, but also thriving and breathing and meditating through these times. And how do we close out this year and get ready for whatever 2021 has in store for all of us as a community. So if you're interested, I sent the link to the webinar series in the chat. Feel free to register and join us. And if you have to head out early, I know it's pretty close to the hour. We understand. Just remember to participate in that post-webinar survey. It'll pop up as soon as you exit the Zoom room. So with that, I think we'll go straight to the Q&A. Lexi, I think we can get out of the slides now. One question, Trey, that came up during your talk was, how can we move beyond allyship and be co-conspirators?
Yeah, I would go back to some of what I was saying earlier. I think it is some of the things like making sure that you're always actively attributing the work and the contributions of folks that are usually rendered invisible. I also think too, it is about that co-conspirator stuff is also about like, how do you put together a plan that is fixed around the orientation of restorative justice for the people who are experiencing harm or injustice in the workplace? How do you put together a plan that you all can present together to be a part of in terms of enacting change in your particular work environment? So that means oftentimes doing the homework of seeking out the perspectives of other people. It also means that you need to be prepared to not be the person leading or like kind of getting credit for leading like kind of like the cause movement inside of a given workplace too. There's many more, but I want to be able to get to other questions too. Mm-hmm.
This anonymous question just came in. So what do you do if you're being asked to do the training for your institution or organization and you are not the expert? And this is a white person running White Ally Development Workshop Series.
First thing you do is say no, you politely decline. Like there is no need for you to put yourself in a position where you are not well equipped to lead a conversation like that. And then I think what you do is you politely decline and present to them like a list of resources around. And this is like almost an opportunity to kind of plug again, like the work that we do. I mean, I would definitely encourage that person to reach out to a group such as Catalyst Ed. I'm also more than glad to refer, you should check out groups like the Equity Lab or Onward Movement or Becoming Better Together, DEI practitioners out there in the space who are already doing this work. What you want to tell these folks is I'm really honored that you want me to lead this conversation. I actually don't feel like I'm the best person to do this, but I do have a line of sight into some groups and resources that we can bring in to spur those conversations for us.
And Trey, more recently in this space, we've heard a lot of conversations about how ally is not the right word to use if you want to do something that's meaningful or actionable. What are your thoughts about that? And I think there's a lot of just language and lingo that's popped up around allyship and doing activism. There's also this notion of slacktivism, right? So you talk about that in your article. It's easy to repost something and say this, right? This thing, right? So can you talk a little bit more about slacktivism, about all of these different things that are popping up in this space and how easy it's become to hit repost on your live story on IG versus having that hard conversation?
Yeah, Sana, I think you just kind of said it there. But look, we talked about this in the prep around this stuff. It is important not to get stuck in a place of intellectualizing what does taking a step forward look like or mean. If you're going to get stuck in the loop of I'm not sure if this is the right term or that's the right term to apply to me, but I think that is a detour. Actually, I think that comes from a place of insecurity and fear, and that's real and that is fine, but don't let that deter you from trying. Like I say in the article, I don't have the luxury of trying to figure out what the right terminology or the right social media post or engagement is. I don't have that luxury at all as a Black person. I have to figure shit out on my own and with my community every day. And I take a risk every day. I take imperfect steps every day. You have to be willing to do the same. What this means is that when you get the brushback or the feedback, you have to be resilient enough to understand that people are giving you the brushback and feedback because they want you to do better and be better. And if you're invested in wanting to do better and be better for society, you will find the right way to depersonalize some of this stuff and figure out a way forward.
Thanks for that, Trey. The other question we have is, are there any recommendations for how to join the movement without removing space for people of color? I'm white and would love to get involved with our campus DEI, but I'm always afraid that I'd be taking up space that really should be for those with lived experience. But then I also get that burden shouldn't fall on them.
Yeah, look, I don't know the context of that particular place. I don't know the Black and brown folks involved in that stuff. There's no monolithic answer for this. I say, ask them. There's nothing wrong with approaching people at your local chapter and saying, I'm interested in helping. What is the best way that looks like, given what you all are doing, given what my skill set and identity is, and where is the opportunity either for me to do something adjacent to you or do something right in concert with you. But there's no flat answer to this stuff. You should just ask.
Thanks, Trey. And if you have to head out early, I see a few people having to drop off. It's close to the hour. We're going to close out these questions and stay on for just a few more moments. But if you have to leave, please do that survey. It'll help inform our work moving forward. Trey, I just received an anonymous question from a person who's identifying as a white ally and saying that they do work in communities of color, particularly with low socioeconomic status, and that their organization does not have the funding needed to bring in a DEI expert, but that individual has been now tapped to put together their DEI committee. What do you think they should do first? That's a loaded question. And also to the individual who posed that question, that's a lot that you're having to do. And so I'll leave it to Trey to give us some feedback on where you can get started.
Two things. One, I chatted in my email address, and whoever you are, I'm more than happy to find time. If you feel comfortable emailing me, let's find time to just sidebar talk about this in general. But the quick and dirty response I have is form the committee, collectively talk together about what your constraints are, figure out what you'll likely need to prioritize what you do want to try and get done given the constraints that you have. And then, I don't know, there are a lot of things that can happen without funding. Look, Black folks have been broke for a long time. We figure out how to put shit together all the time. So I don't want you to think that success or progress needs to hinge on money alone. There's resources galore out there. There might be local chapters of social justice, racial justice aligned groups that might already be funded to do work like to push in and do work like that with an organization like yours, and maybe you just have to seek them out. The other thing too is that there are grant opportunities for different types of work you might want to do. You might even be able to get like grant funding for like books or something like that to help get you in a starter place. But those are the quick thoughts that I have. But certainly feel free to reach out and email me too, and we can talk more.
And then finally, we had a number of questions that were around racial battle fatigue, cultural taxation, feeling tapped out, drained, right? Those were some of the words that came up through the chat and just in conversation. So I'll pose that question to both of you. And Trey, if you'll go first, can you offer some feedback or guidance to our professionals of color, particularly Black professionals who do feel being one of maybe the only one or one of, very few group people in the organizations that are pushing forward, but are also just tapped out and not feeling like they can continue doing the work with where they're at?
Well, you have no obligation to save your institution. You really don't. You have zero obligation to do that. You have tremendous likely investment in wanting to see things different, but like, it is not your literal figure job to fix other people or themselves, especially if they're not invested in it. The other thing too is just like, this is a great segue to Lexi, but like, I'm a firm believer in therapy. I've been in therapy for 7 years straight with the same therapist. And that has certainly gotten me through a lot of situations in life in general. And the last thing too is like, you are entitled to making a choice every day that is reflective of what your state of well-being is. So like, Monday, you may be willing to lean into conversation. It is fine to turn around on Tuesday and be like, I ain't about this today. That is totally fine.
Lexi, you want to add to that?
Yes, I echo that. There have been many days where I'm more than happy to have the discussion, and other days, especially, it shows up in the mental health community amongst therapists as well. And I saw even in the summer where everyone was quick to wanting to do something. It ended up being a lot of white people trying to lead these types of conversations. And I think a lot of them have stopped. So yeah, you have no obligation. I've said this before in other webinars, Google is free. And I have told that to plenty of people that Google is free. You can start there. I'm more than happy to maybe give you 1 or 2 resources if you get stuck, but I'm tired. I am very tired as a Black woman in America. I'm very tired. And so we also talked a little bit about this in, I think it was the first webinar. We really talked about self-care, racial battle fatigue. And I would implore, and I think there was a couple of people that asked about that, and I'll send you the links. They're on the Trellis website. Highly encourage you to watch those webinars as well, because in order to keep doing this work, you have to take care of yourself. Like, there's no way around it. You have to be well rested. You have to feel good about yourself in order to continue this work. Also, something that Trey mentioned, and I know we got to go, is he had said, like, let's not intellectualize this as much. And if you are and you're scared to kind of get started, it's coming from a place of insecurity and fear, is what he said. And that resonated because I see that so much, especially in clients, even in white clients, where they're not sure where to start. And so they get held back. So when you're not sure where to start, you get frozen. You don't know where to begin. You don't know how to start these groups. You don't know how to start the conversation. So keep that in mind. That's a great place to even start therapy, is if you are coming at this from a place of insecurity and fear, start therapy. Do that exploration. Figure out what you need.
Thank you. And then our final question, again, comes in from an anonymous attendee. How can we extend this alliance with Native and urban tribes who have been historically disenfranchised? So Trey, if you want to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think the how of it isn't much different than maybe many of the same tactics that we've talked about over the course of this. I mean, I think you've got to figure out the right balance of gaining and educating yourself on the context of what those issues are, like that are germane to that particular community, and then find whatever ways you can to like form small relationships to gain like understanding, perspective. And again, like be in a position of a learner about how do you be supportive based on how they see an opportunity to see justice enacted inside of whatever context you're seeking to engage an Indigenous community member on. So it's also not my place to like overly prescribe around something like that. That's outside of my identity context.
Thanks, Trey, and thanks, Lexi. And thank you to everyone for joining us today. We're a little over our time, but thank you for staying and for asking your questions. And there was a lot of engagement and connections happening in the chat. And so I'm happy to see that this has been a small community Lexi and I have been able to offer to you all. We hope that you'll come next time to breathe and move with us before the new year. But if you have any questions, you have our information, you know where to find us. I've dropped the links to Trey's article. He has his email out there. Feel free to reach out to us. But I hope that in this time that you all are taking care of yourself first. You're filling your own cup. Lexi and I, that's what we called our first workshop, was fill your own cup first. So we hope that you're doing that you're taking good care. And we wish well for your communities, for your organizations, for your institutions of higher education, and that we're here if you need someone to talk to about any of the topics we've covered. Lexi, Trey, any words to close us out today?
Be safe, be happy.
I'm so grateful. Right. I'm so grateful for the both of you right now. I'm just happy to be in this space. Thank you all.
Great. Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye.